Yep. So for everyone listening, for Dom, if he comes back in, I'll forward the whole thing to them to have the whole file for the entire charge crew. Um, what I was saying was most of the people in this room are going to be well enough aware to the usual data and conversations of weight loss is move more, eat less, burn more than you need. The issue with that is the nuances that it creates in understanding complex individuals, busy individuals, high performers. So what we've put together is basically an understanding, or at least an expression of understanding the impacts that stress and structure can have on sustainable fat loss. So whilst it's going to contain information about nutrition, the Q&A is going to be more than open to as much nutrition as possible. I am a qualified sports nutritionist. That is going to be the extension of the conversation, not the priority. The priority is having us understand the impacts that stress will play in the up and downstream effects on fat loss and what makes fat loss possible. So basically, starting out is understanding stress, structure, and sustainable fat loss, why high performers often struggle with weight loss despite succeeding everywhere else, which is going to be most of you guys. So, an easy example I like to run when I have this conversation is my own prep. So, I'm a competitive bodybuilder. I literally just got off stage back in May. However, during my 2025 prep, right, I was doing all the things, nailing all of the boxes, ticking all of the boxes, doing everything right, eating all of the veg and fruit that I subscribed to my own clients, sleeping as much as I possibly could, training 5, 6 days a day, 6 days a week. I was doing all of my hours of cardio, thousands of steps, but I was also under eating 1,200 calories per day based on my coach's advice. I was running two businesses. I was studying full time at university. I was coaching 30 to 40 clients. So the reason I like to use this example was by all metrics, weight should have been flying off. But I got to a certain point where my body simply stopped complying. And to the logical coach that isn't really aware of nuance or for people to understand the differences, it doesn't make sense when you say, well, you're eating 1,200 calories and doing all this work, weight should be moving and fat should be coming off. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. I ended up having to pull out because my body was so stressed, so inflamed, and so agitated that it simply wasn't responding to the inputs. And when the body stops responding to the inputs, we don't get the outputs that we need. So part of this conversation today is going to be asking why stress impacts those things and how that actually has an implication in the outcome that we're trying to achieve. Because you guys, when you're working with Dom, when you're in the charge clinics, when you're in the group environments, you're doing all the work and the output isn't occurring, it gets a little frustrating, it gets a little stressful, it gets a little emotional, it gets to what I call a spiral. So I did have some questions here. I was going to hit everyone, but let's do it anyway. So hands up, who's ever said I'm going to start on Monday after an event, something's come up, got in the way. I'm going to start Monday and start fresh with a new challenge or a diet or training, whatever it might be. Amy, you're the one that I know is in the room, so we've ever done the
Definitely,
we've ever
yes.
done the I'll start Monday. Yep. Had you ever actually restarted on Monday properly?
Sometimes.
Does it last more than a few weeks? Maybe a few months?
Depending, yes.
Cool. So, okay, there you literally answered the next question. Who's restarted on a Monday more than a few times? So, the the reason why I ask this question is that for most people that would be in this room that is in the invite list, what we are seeing is essentially the standard weight loss program, right? We start Monday, we get ourselves amped up, we're stressed out, life is not in a good position to diet, to deficit, to recover from. We end up starting the diet. It doesn't go very well because we're so stressed, because we're not responding, because we're so emotional, heightened, under recovered. We then end up spiraling from that. It gets a couple of weeks down the track. We drop off because, now we're gone from quick fix and 100, 0 to 100 to suddenly we're trying to, go out on the weekends, eat all the food, and we've fallen off the wagon. Then it's a matter of, okay, I'll start back on Monday. I'll start back on Monday. And we repeat this same cycle, having to never really achieve the result we're trying to achieve. And it's very rarely, based on the next slide, a knowledge problem that people have. Most often, it is a consistency and systemization problem. We aren't structuring and systemizing our environment and our life to standardize a way where we can make fat loss possible. When it comes to execution, I've worked with a range from elite athletes, professional bodybuilders, amateur bodybuilders, and everyday mums and dads. The most consistent thing that I find is that it's not a knowledge problem people have. We know that we should be eating more fruit and vegetables and protein. It is a matter of consistency and systemization where we are reducing the friction to execution so that the thing can be done and the thing can be achieved. So, what we're intending to try and learn today, and I'll honestly go as long as we have questions and as much information as I can give, but we'll try and get through the slides first, is the impacts or understanding why stress impacts weight loss, why motivation isn't necessarily the answer for high performers, how stress affects behavior and consistency, how we like to try and build systems, and practical tools that you can use with a challenge to go put them in practice come Monday. So what is the real problem? For me, the frustration most people experience is not whether or not they should be in a deficit or what the knowledge of nutrition is, what proteins are, what carbs are. At a certain level, the people that you guys are, the type of client that you guys are, I'm more than certain that we're aware of what a protein and carbohydrate is and how we should be having some protein after a workout or before a workout. We should be having some carbohydrates. The issue lie with I know exactly what I should be doing. I just can't stay consistent. I do well for a few weeks and fall off. Life gets busy and everything falls apart. We don't have the systemization and structure in place to handle when the downturn comes. Everyone bases success and bases their story on when life is going well. However, they don't plan for when things start to turn. And it's what I call hoping for the best, but you plan for the worst. Having a system in place that only works when life is easy is not a system. That's just good luck and well wishes. So the thing is, this is actually far more common than most people realize. And after coaching hundreds of clients now for many, many years in behavioral modification, nutrition, fat loss, competition preps, it is very rarely I need to know more about nutrition and more about how do we look at the impacts that my stress levels, stress variables, and my systemization is actually creating. So the high performer trap that I feel most of you guys are going to fit into. High performers often solve problems by working harder. We do more of the thing. We try to push ourselves harder, and we try to do more of the work. Right? It's a great analogy of Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the hill. We push and push and push, only for it to come all the way back down. We've got to start all over again. Health rarely improves through more pressure alone, though. It is not a simple matter of I can put the foot down and go harder and do more that will produce the outcome we're trying to achieve. The desire to do the work, in your case, motivation, is rarely absent until we are completely burnt out, we've lost interest, and we drop off the wagon. We fall off tracks, and it's just simply done for the week or done for the month. More effort, though, without more structure often creates more frustration, which in turn, as we'll see soon down the track in the slides, creates a frustration emotion spiral that then leads to the problem exacerbating, not being solved. Most people need to actually get better systems, not more guilt. So white knuckling your way through the problem doesn't always work when it comes to health. Although there's the grit grind mentality we like to have, especially as high performers, hard workers, the get afterers, there is still a degree in which the more is better answer ends up being detrimental. So we're talking about stress, right? How do we look at stress? How do we start to understand it better? Well, my biggest hope from this situation and this conversation is systemization and actually having a different perspective on stress. Stress is often perceived as the bad guy, but we need to contextualize how it matters. So stress in this conversation, we're talking about a challenge that requires adaptation. When we look at chaos, when we look at stress that we can't handle, that's when demands become unpredictable and overwhelm our available resources. So we all have a limited capacity of resources available to us that we can utilize to handle stress, to handle life, to get through events. When stress starts to compound without structure and predictability, we start to overwhelm the available resources we have, which then exacerbates the emotional reactions further. So examples, a busy week, very easily that's stressful, yes, but it's manageable. We know that we have a predictable busy week coming up. We can handle it. Constant emergencies, though, being reactive tends to lead to chaos, emotional spiral. Plan challenge. So maybe you've got literally a planned challenge coming up. Maybe you have, a busy work event coming up. Maybe you've got, a holiday that you have to plan for. Stressful, but not unmanageable. No structure, though, when it comes to organizing your week, when it comes to structuring nutrition, when it comes to structuring when you're supposed to be at work, at training, when you're supposed to be doing things, generally leads to a chaotic response and emotional reactivity. Most people can actually handle stress, right? It is a survival mechanism we've had since the dawn of time that we've been around. It's the chaos without structure that tends to break the consistency for most people. And this is where the conversation is going to start leading. So the biggest takeaway, as I said, understanding stress, that it isn't the enemy that we often think it is. So what is stress, right? We use the word stress all the time, but I think words matter. I think understanding definitions and criteria is important. We often use stress in the analogy or example of my work environment, my boss, this, that, and the other. But what is stress actually doing? Well, stress is any event, demand, or situation that is requiring adaptation. Anything that changes your physical, psychological, or emotional state can be considered stress. It doesn't mean that that is good or bad adaptation or change. It just simply is. So your body's response to a challenge is what we would define as stress. So examples. Exercise, whilst it is a good thing we encourage people's health, is stressful. Dieting, reducing calories in someone's diet, reducing energy availability is still a physiological stress. But then we could also look at, work deadlines, parenting, financial pressure, poor sleep. All these variables can both be positive and negative stress. The idea of perhaps buying your first home, whilst it is an amazing feat and a positive thing in your life, absolutely creates degrees of financial pressure. But you would argue that that is not a bad thing that we are creating. Yet when we use the word stress, it often has negative connotations. So good stress versus bad stress is a very easy way to conceptualize it. We call it helpful stress, right? Adaptable stress, growth stress. The old diamonds are created under pressure type analogy. Exercise, learning, building a career, developing new skills. These are all stressful situations, choices, endeavors, actions. They aren't what we would consider bad stress, right? But when we use the word stress, we have to change how we view things. Harmful stress, we would consider chronic sleep deprivation, constant overwhelm, ongoing emotional strain, recovery deficits. These things you would be considered harmful stress where we aren't producing the available resources to adapt or overcome, and it's exacerbating the situation worse. So the key takeaway for this one, or the difference, is that helpful stress is followed by recovery. The most way to consolidate information, the best way to learn new skills, the best way to recover from exercise is to recover, sleep, is to have downturns or downtime. All those things actually allow the adaptation to occur. So why do we demonize stress? Stress is often blamed as the problem caused because we perceive it only through the bad stress lens. Usually it goes something like this. Boss yells at work, deadline stress, emotional home life, food sounds great, that tub of ice cream and the movie on Friday night sounds like a great choice. That's how we start to perceive the stress spiral. Yet stress is also required for muscle growth, learning, confidence, progression, adaptation. The misperception that people have is that stress is bad, yet stress is growth requires stress. We need to be stressing ourselves to improve. It is the adaptation that requires recovery that we need to be addressing and fixing. So we can also look at it through the stress model, which is understanding that stress demands exist. Distress is when demands exceed available resources and we don't have sufficient fuel to recover or adapt to what we're doing. So what might resources include, since we've used that a few times? Time, energy, sleep, support, skills. Distress occurs when recovery can't keep up and we spend all of our time in a sympathetic state. Now, the question then becomes, what is a sympathetic state and why does that matter? This brings us to the nervous system, right? So the understanding of the nervous system is it's a very important, but we're not going to spend a lot of time here, sort of concept. The sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight response. So sorry, we have our fight or flight response. The fight response is your sympathetic side. The gas pedal, full action, performance, productivity, we're fighting or we're flighting, we're getting away from the problem or attacking the problem. This state is where most people live, but they don't realize. The problem with this is in a sympathetic state is very hard for the body to rest, to recover, to relax, to actually create adaptation, to pull down emotional dysregularity, to actually stabilize itself and get healthy. It's very hard to do when you're going to bed wired at 10 o'clock at night and you can't sleep until 1 a.m. to wake up and feel charged come 5 a.m., 6 a.m. for that morning session, to not have the extra scoop of ice cream, to not have the extra donut in the pantry. The nervous system is in a state of perpetual anxiety and stress. It is in a state of alertness and wideness that we have to sort of learn how to calm and pull back. Most high performers, most of the people that will be in this call and in this room know how to push. That isn't the issue. It is how we pull back and recover and allow that adaptation that is the biggest difference. The parasympathetic nervous system is what we call our rest and digest. That is the brake pedal. We have to be able to pull back in order to go further forward. Recovery, digestion, repair, and sleep, emotional regularity, and emotional regulation. This is one of my favorite concepts that I like to teach. Is where people often make most of the problems when it comes to their nutritional accuracy, when it comes to recovery, when it comes to health. Stress isn't the issue. It is anxiety that often comes associated or as a byproduct of that stress that the problems are created. So stress says basically there is a challenge or there is a threat. Anxiety, or the perception of anxiety, the physiological feeling of anxiety, is when your brain says, I'm not sure I have the resources to handle this challenge, or is another way that I like to articulate it to high performers, to athletes, to get after us, is that you don't have the weapons to deal with the threat that you perceive. So if we don't have that, the body says, well, what do I need to do? I need to be alert. I need to be wide. What am I doing? How do I fuel this resource? How do I get myself back to a position to handle this? Those resources might include time, confidence, support, experience, but it also includes fuel. So that's what I was talking about previously. We can look at the idea that, emotional dysregulation spirals into, oh, that ice cream sounds like a really good idea. As we said here, to solve this, we often turn to food to regulate or soothe that emotional dysregulation. Anxiety often increases as resources decrease. So our perception of the ability to handle a challenge decreases down, our anxiety goes up. And this is where a lot of the problem starts to occur for people. Any questions so far on the stress response?
Nope, it all sounds Really informative. Thank you.
Amazing. So we've talked about stress. We've addressed, some things like, hey, this is a nutrition seminar. This is a fat loss seminar. We're supposed to be talking about these things. Cool. Why consistency breaks is the hidden effect of stress. Now, we talk about consistency. That can be training. That can be, anything under the sun. In the instance here, we're talking about fat loss. We're talking about dieting. We're talking about consistency in your training and execution. So why does consistency break when it comes to stress? So one of the biggest misconceptions that we've probably all heard, some of us have used or spoke about, and me and Dom had a great conversation about this, was this perception that stress creates hormonal responses that creates an inability to lose fat or lose weight, right? That is the common, I guess, equation or the workflow that people perceive to be the case when it comes to stress management and it comes to fat loss. How many times like, oh, I'm too stressed, my cortisol's too high. Because cortisol's too high, I can't actually burn fat and my body won't use it for fuel properly. The evidence is quite clear. The systems are quite clear. The data is quite clear. It's not that stress makes fat loss impossible. It's that stress exacerbates the behaviors and the downstream effects that makes the fat loss harder to achieve. It makes it creates barriers, it creates hurdles, but it doesn't make it impossible. And this is where a lot of people get it wrong. And they sort of talk themselves out of the conversation before it's even had. They simply tell themselves that stress has made it too hard for me to lose weight, so I'm not going to try. The reality is we call that rationalization. You're rationalizing and justifying the choice to have the donut, cookie, ice cream, pizza, because that is a self-fulfilling, self-soothing option compared to dieting, cooking your meals, sticking to your training, getting up and going for a walk. That doesn't feel as soothing and comfortable in the short term. So people in the effect of stress, the presence of high degrees of stress, low perceived ability to deal with it, the inability to have the resources to adapt to it, will often move less. They will sleep worse. We skip planning, we eat more impulsively, train less consistently. This is all to do with things like the prefrontal cortex that is responsible for goal-oriented action and forward momentum. It is about filtration and making decisions. It's basically the brain section of delayed gratification. So when we're looking at stress, we're in this high yield of emotionality where under a high degree of pressure, the body feels off. We're just in a dysregulated state. The idea then becomes the idea of doing more stuff, the idea of perhaps, getting up and going to the gym, the idea of sticking to the diet or your macros or your protein, carbs, and fats, the idea of getting more vegetables in, the idea of not having that pizza on Friday night is harder to justify. So we end up fighting against ourselves in a cognitive neural capacity because the brain is trying to rationalize and tell us that, hey, this is okay. We don't actually have the available resources in the brain function right now to stop us from doing this. So it's a lot easier to do. And this is where the fat loss problem, the stress problem creates the fat loss problem. It's not that stress is creating a hormonal cascade that stops you from losing weight. It's that it makes the behaviors that allow fat loss, that allow weight loss, that allow nutritional consumption to be more difficult. So the challenge is often behavioral, not informational or hormonal. The way that I like to express it is what we'll call the cascade effect. Stress tends to increase, right? Our capacity decreases. So because stress is increasing, that can be anything from workload, family life. You've got 2 or 3 kids. You're running a business or a second business. You've got an athlete event coming up. You're an athlete on the field, but you're also a family person at home. Stress goes up. Our perception of the ability to deal with that stress is increasing. Generally, what happens from this is our capacity goes down. So our capacity to do other things, or capacity to stick to things, our capacity to tolerate things tends to decrease. Which, because of this, we then start to rationalize, justify. We sleep in bed, we stay a little bit later, we make poorer choices, we aren't as consistent. The consistency decreases. Now, we all know that consistency is a key factor when it comes to long-term success, whether it be dieting, training, execution, sports performance, recoverability. If we aren't consistently doing the thing, we can't consistently expect the result. And that leads to the next point, which is results decrease. So if results are decreasing, what tends to happen then? Well, we end up in a frustration cascade. We end up in this state of emotional reactivity. We're getting frustrated the result isn't happening. We're getting disappointed that we perceive our efforts to be high and we're not yielding the outcome that we want, which then ironically exacerbates stress further. Now, the easiest way to perceive this is that stress would just continue to repeat the same cycle down and down or create a feedback loop. The idea that motivation is the issue for most people is a misconception. You don't lose motivation first. I would argue you lose capacity to keep going. Motivation is a reinforcing process in conjunction with dopamine. So if we aren't doing the thing consistently that makes us feel good to keep wanting to do it, motivation will drop off. That is where the consistency issue becomes relevant. It's where frustration becomes prevalent. It's where the results start to decline, and we just continue to exacerbate the cycle of the cascade further. So stress directly, as we sort of spoke about previously, stress directly impacts decision making, recoverability, sleep quality, food choices, emotional regulation, training performance. All of these things are impacted decisionally, neurologically. The brain will basically make all of these things harder to do. You're going to make worse decisions. That will mean, if we correlate that to the other factors, right? If we're going to make worse decisions, we're going to go to bed later at night and we're going to wake up later and sleep in, which means we're now pushing the clock back in the morning. We're less prepared with our nutrition. We haven't had good sleep quality because we're tossing and turning. We're highly anxious and aroused. We have a high degree, a neural state that isn't allowing recovery to occur. So food choices get worse because we're rushing, we're panicked, we're out the door too quickly. We've got to grab the croissant and the coffee from the bakery. We're not actually getting a hearty meal full of protein, vegetable, and carbohydrates in the morning. We're making worse decisions based on emotional dysregulation, and that is all going to impact our ability to stick to our diet and training. So high stress changes your decisions long before it changes results. Now, this was a big one that Dom and I have spoken about as well, is understanding that the underfueling state is a stress as well. So getting to the nutritional component of the conversation, high performers actually create additional stress through extra vectors that we need to consider. Eating too little, skipping meals, fear of carbohydrates, excessive dieting, excessive calorie restriction. Yes, at the end of the day, calories in versus calorie out. We need to eat less than we burn in order to achieve a deficit in order to reduce body fat. But if we look at my first story, going back to how it didn't work for me, excessive dieting in the presence of high pressure stress doesn't lead to a better outcome. So we need to understand that fueling for training, fueling sufficiently for recovery for the adaptations to occur, having sufficient fuel like proteins to recover from are going to be how we decrease that stress. We need to remember that all things that we are doing, these things like training, dieting, work life, family life, they are stresses. So adding an additional stressor like underfueling is only going to make those symptoms worse, not better. But because we get after it, we're so busy, we're so high strung, the appetite kicks in, dysregulation occurs, the sympathetic nervous system decreases appetite and hunger, our metabolism and digestion slows down, the body tends to say, hey, I don't need food. And so we end up pushing ourselves through these days with minimal eating. We're not eating enough food. We're not feeling trained effectively. Then we'll go to charge. We'll go to the field. We'll go to our sport. We'll go to the gym, and everything is underfueled and underprepared. So your body doesn't work separate. Your body doesn't separate work and diet stress. These are compounding variables that stack on top of each other. And this leads to what I believe is one of the biggest problems of the weight loss paradox. We go through fat loss, we target fat loss, we talk about wanting to lose weight, right? That is a known fixation for a lot of people. We become fixated on the scale. We become ideally obsessed with being perfect. We set unrealistic expectations for ourselves, and then we start to attack ourselves if it doesn't work properly. One of the things that I find is the more that we fixate on the weight loss itself each day, especially if it isn't going the way we want it to, the harder that weight loss becomes because stress becomes exacerbated. So again, it's not a variable about nutrition, but we're looking at here and going, well, the idea of simply losing weight and becoming fixated on that perfectionism and trying to achieve it is actually creating another stimulant to the stress response, which is making the fat loss even harder. And if that's making it harder, is it something that we need to be doing right now? Is it something that we can do separate later once we have a better system in place, a better response in place, a better body in place to handle that focus? Dieting to me is a phase that we earn and get to. So the stress around weight loss often becomes another barrier to weight loss. Any questions around stress, implications of behaviors, fat loss so far?
I feel like I noticed that everything that you've said so far, it all ties down to like the psychological aspect of how you want to go about your health and your fitness training. And like there could be so many other outside environmental factors, but it's kind of like how you perceive all those
Mm-hmm.
things and how you handle that stress is like what leads to all of it. And I've personally gone through that myself, a lot of those things you've listed, and um I've actually seen a nutritionist recently, and I felt like it's been really helpful to really understand like fueling properly because I've been training for running. I still
Mm-hmm.
play soccer. I've tried a little bit of CrossFit as well. So I'm doing a lot, but also trying to manage my stress in other ways. So yeah, it's really interesting the way you're presenting it. So I appreciate it.
Amazing. And that leads kind of perfectly to the next point, which is building a better system and environment. And this is where I think the biggest change variable or vector that you can make to your result actually lay for most people, right? It's not simply restrict all the food and do all the extra cardio. It's how do we create a better system and environment that allows those changes to occur with as little friction as possible. So for me, I'm a big believer that fat loss is often an environment problem. And that's not to say that, your house is a problem or your relationships are a problem, but simply collective environment is making it harder to diet, to fat loss. Most people believe they need more discipline, motivation, willpower, right? We've already been through why that isn't the case. You wouldn't even be on the call here if you didn't think if you didn't have the motivation to learn and be better. What we usually need is better systems, planning, structure, and execution. We need to reduce the friction between thought, intention, and behavior. When we do that, it makes it easier to execute, so we decrease the stress in making that decision. Again, it's all about looking at the total yield or net stress position. Are we in a high state of stress? Are we in a lower state of stress? How are we adapting to the situation? Well, the best way to do that is create systems that reduce friction to execution and reduce the demand to make decisions in real time. And we're outsourcing to systems and structure that allow the result to take place. And this is where I think fat loss is actually more of an environmental problem for most people. So the biggest thing that I teach, that's one of the biggest things I teach for clients, for bodybuilders, for athletes, is we need to be systemizing our health. Make as little decisions each day as possible because they've been so systemized and frameworked that they basically make the decision for you. It's not a matter of what do I have for breakfast. We simply know what we're having for breakfast. We don't need to worry about what time we go to the gym because it's in the schedule. So we apply the same principles used in successful businesses. And this is where I believe there's a crossover correlation between business and sport, is that we can often take from one another to make things better. So create repeatable routines, create standard operating procedures for your health, create predictable habits that allow the result to take place, and make fewer daily decisions because the decisions are made by your systems. Consistency becomes easier when decision fatigue is lower. So reduce stress before it happens. Meal preparation, grocery shopping, calendar planning, schedule training. Getting your morning ready the night before is a big one I teach. Allocate your training and recovery times into the calendar. The idea is to force these things into your mind, into your day, into your calendar, your schedule, so that you can't make the decision to not do it. It simply is. It becomes what we call a non-negotiable. You are then freeing up the emotional load in case of challenge, in case of the threat response or stress response, and then you can have more available resources to deal with it. What does that do? Ironically, decreases the negative spiral. What I like to do, and something big that we did with Dr. Dom, was the Sunday reset. Now, I know it's very common to say, oh, meal prep on Sunday, but we need to anchor it and make it specific. A weekly recovery and preparation ritual sets up your week. Review the week ahead, plan meals, grocery shop, schedule training, review family commitments, book recovery activities. Make it fixed, make it happen. Make it set in the ways that you know that's going to get done, and it reduces, again, friction to execution. That is how we systemize the fat loss phase to be possible. We know when we're going for a walk. We know when we're going for the gym. We know when we're going to meal prep. We know when we have to make our foods up, our meals up. We know when we're going to be doing our recovery options, our family time, our downtime. Less chaos, decision fatigue, more consistency. Now, parasympathetic exposure. This is what we're talking about before. This is the recovery dial, right? This is the thing where we're allowing that adaptation to occur. I'm not going to go through the entire list, but basically understand that training exposes us to stress, right? It creates the environment where adaptation is possible. Recovery activates activities expose us to where that recovery is necessary, where that adaptation takes place. So recovery is a skill. It's not an accident. We don't just magically become recovered. We have to plan for it. As I like to word it, recovery is an investment, not a reward. Most people believe I'll rest when everything is done, right? That's like Kobe's most famous quote is "Job's not finished," and I respect the absolute hell out of Kobe. But everything is never done. He still went to bed. He still did his physiotherapy. Still went to the movies. Still did things with his family, right? Everything is never done. So if we wait for everything to be done to recover and to adapt, we're actually decreasing productivity and efficiency of result. We're decreasing the ability to get the job done and be healthy. Recovery should occur before a burnout appears. One of my favorite quotes that I teach is recover as hard as you train and work. So if you are burning the bridge, you are working the house down in your training, your work life, there needs to be equal or at least a balance point of the same level of recovery. So we've got a multitude of recovery options here between passive and active recovery. Things like walking, mobility, stretching, gaming, movies, watching sports, hobbies, social connection, date nights. Different people recover differently, but this is your window for adaptation to occur. You've placed the stress on the body. You're stressing the body with dieting, with work life, with training. Let's rest and recover and allow adaptation to take place. And this is where we increase what I believe the capacity metric. So stress management is rarely about eliminating stress, right? We have that perception from the start of the conversation that we need to remove stress or stress is bad. Stress is simply the situation where we're applying the pressure to allow change to occur. The goal is to increase your ability to handle stress and to systemize stress so that you don't end up making poor decisions, worse decisions. You end up ruining your recoverability and your body ends up in a worse state. That's like things like seeing increased blood pressure, increased heart rate, where we're making poorer food choices, we're not sleeping, we're too wide, we can't go to bed. As high performers, we don't need less stress. Most of us in this room, most of us on the call, we thrive in the environment of being pressured and challenged. What we need is an equal level of recovery and systemization to improve that capacity to handle it. If we stack too high, the building will fall over. If we build a stronger foundation and base to handle that height, we'll be able to handle more and build further, build higher. So getting to the fuel and recovery part. Fuel matters. And this one is important to understand, right? Yes, dieting is a matter of restricting calories for a certain point and dropping the deficit. However, your body requires energy to train, recover, think, work, adapt. So we need to understand we're not just fueling for the matter of I've got to go to the gym or I want to lose body fat or weight. We need to understand that we are fueling a system, and that system is always on. It's not a choice. So we need to look at the understanding high output can't come from a chronically underfueled system. So whether that's your training modalities, whether it's your work life, your relationships, your family, business, it doesn't matter. We cannot expect high functional output with underfueled systems. It simply won't work. At a certain point, that system is going to break. Now, again, going back to a big conversation with Dom was having people understand that, as you sort of spoke about previously, right, Amy, is carbohydrates are not the enemy. Carbohydrates are actually used to support adaptation. We need them to allow recovery to take place. We need them to allow fueling to take place and energy levels to be raised. It improves training performance, recoverability, energy levels, brain function, fuels the adaptation that we are actually working for and trying to achieve. I have my clients, when in a deficit, when in a fat loss phase, produce at least 30% of their day's carbohydrates around their training window to ensure that they are fueling training sufficiently. It has the metabolic support that it needs, and it allows the adaptations we're trying to develop to occur. So that means like getting things in like rices, oats, fruits, potatoes, breads, pastas. These fuel performance and then maximize the adaptation. So in the sense where we're trying to manage stress by reducing carbohydrates, by undereating, by underfueling, you're actually increasing the stress load, decreasing the adaptation recoverability window, which is then spiraling the outcomes further, making fat loss and performance even harder. So in the paradox of I'm cutting carbohydrates to lose weight, we end up making the weight loss, fat loss paradigm actually harder to achieve. So again, recovery is a performance tool. Recovery improves energy, mood, decision-making, consistency, performance. It is a productive part of the equation for fat loss, weight loss, business performance, training performance, field performance. This is what we call the high-low model, right? The high demand should be followed by deliberate recovery. We have a high stress exposure. We're deliberately placing ourselves in stressful environments. We then have a recovery exposure. We need the low situation to take place. We need to activate the parasympathetic phase. Hard training plus sleep, busy week, planned downtime, work demands, a recovery ritual with the family. That is where the adaptation actually takes place. That is where fat loss is going to be most efficient. Yes, obviously you have fat loss in the output phase, but if we're trying to manage stress and allow for better decision making, recoverability, we're making real-time choices, we're getting training performance improving. We need to ensure that we are recovering to allow the adaptation to take place so that we can actually develop the resilience and the structure, the cognitive structure to handle stress in the future. The idea is not just physical training or nutritional training, is that we are training the brain, the mind, and the body to handle stress at a higher low so we don't feel as stressed in the future. Recovery isn't something you earn, it's what it allows you to handle the next high demand period. Now, protecting sleep is a big one. If I were to go back to a 2010 study, there was sleep deprivation groups that were controlled. Basically, there was 5.5 hours and 8.5 hours. The group that was deprived of sleep for 5.5 hours, not only did they lose less weight on the exact same calories as the other group, they actually lost more muscle mass than fat mass from the weight that they did lose, which completely conflicts with what our perception of nutritional biochemistry is and what nutritional physiology is. The idea that losing weight should just simply be I ate less food and I burned more fat was almost not disproved, but definitely challenged by this group, by this study. Seeing that people that slept only 5.5 hours, which is drastically deprived of sleep for about 11 days, I believe it was, showed substantial differences in muscle retention and the amount of fat that was actually burned. So that completely conflicts with our understanding of why we need to look at, hey, I'll grind when I'm dead. I'll stop when the work is done. The idea of we're trying to lose fat, we're trying to lose weight, not getting the sufficient sleep. I mean, 7 to 9 hours, having particular downtime, having sleep protocols that actually allow you to unwind properly. Doing what I call is planning the morning the night before, taking stress off your mind before you go to bed. This is protecting the act of sleep. It is protecting sleep and your sleep hygiene that is going to, again, allow greater consistency and application and reduce stress, which, if we go back to this entire conversation, is going to make better nutritional choices and improve fat loss. So I've rambled for a little bit, but one of the biggest things that I wanted you guys to be able to take away from this is have something to tangibly act upon come Monday. For you guys, it is Friday night right now. What are 5 things that I believe are going to help you actually structure fat loss, weight loss, better nutritional protocols, better training performance, and better adaptation? It's not going to be, I can sit here and say, have 2 grams of protein or 1 gram of protein per pound. I can say have, 500 grams of fruits and vegetables a day, drink 4 liters of water a day. That's very basic or fundamental nutritional concepts. You're going to understand those. I could send an ebook on those if we needed to, but that's not going to make the changes that you need to make. 5 things that I'll put into practice literally come Monday that you can all do without a question is set a sleep and wake time and stick to it. So I mean, set an alarm of when to go to bed, not just when to wake up. That is a huge difference for a lot of people. Set a time that you actually go to sleep. Buy at least 3 to 5 days of food for the week. Make it easy to see, front of face, in the fridge, prepared and easy to assemble. The less friction to execution on your diet, the easier it's going to be to stick to. Schedule your training and recovery activities. As we spoke about, we are trying to create a high stress demand with a low response. The high-low model matters. We're trying to make sure that we are recovering as hard as we are training. Use Sunday to plan your week and then de-escalate. So again, we're using Sunday to set up the week. We're looking at our schedule, what needs to get done. We're preparing the kids. We're preparing the work life. We're preparing the environment, our schedule, our calendar, what clients are where, what times you have to be in certain places. And then we're de-escalating. You don't want to end the week on a heightened state and start the week perpetually worse. The idea is to make Monday as easy as possible to execute. The biggest thing that I would suggest, and something that I really encourage with a lot of clients when I teach them out, when we start out working together, is pick one thing. Just pick one thing that you're trying to work on. Nutritional consistency, cool. Let's create a workflow to reduce the friction of execution, right? So what does that look like? Well, I'm up early in the morning, so I'm going to make my meal the night before. I'm going to have my training clothes out so I can wake up and go straight to the gym. I'm going to have my pre-workout meal, and I've got my lunch prepared so I don't buy takeaway. Create the workflow that say workflows and SOPs work in the environment in your job. It is part of what's going to help you survive and achieve the outcome that we're trying to achieve with our fat loss. Final lessons. So we can wrap this up and get into some Q&A. Stress is not the enemy. It is the principle for change. Recovery drives adaptation. Fat loss, in my opinion, is believed through systemization and reduction of stress. Rarely has anything we've spoken about in this conversation been about here's your calorie targets or here's your protein targets. Eat more protein, consume fruits and vegetables as a priority, get more water in. Those are easy nutritional strategies. I'll give them away for free. Consistency beats perfection. The idea that we should remove all stress is a misunderstanding and a misattribution of what stress does. Life will always contain stress. It is not a choice. It simply is. It simply is on. It's how much of it that we need to experience. Build systems that work despite stress. If we only wait for life to be perfect, and we only wait for a fat loss phase, or we only wait for dieting or consistency in the gym, nutrition, when life is easy, it's never going to happen. We're never going to start. So start despite of stress, but build the systems that make it possible to achieve. In my opinion, when it comes to these factors, the goal is not to build a life with less stress. It's to build a body that can thrive despite of it, and fat loss and all will take place. The idea is that we are building the capacity to handle stress through systemization and structure that almost makes the stress redundant or I guess negligible. We're never going to have a full, complete window where stress is absent in our entire life. As we sort of spoke about, stress it just is. There's stress, distress, there's good stress, bad stress. It's just going to take place. So setting up a life that handles that stress more effectively and allows you to systemize and structure execution in spite of it is how we achieve the result. So that, in my opinion, is the next layer to fat loss besides here's your nutritional targets. Open the floor for Q&A. Any questions, anything I didn't cover? If you have nutritional topic conversations, anything at all. Dom, I think you said you had a few questions, but Dom's a living life case for us, or a case study. So whatever you got.
Yeah, hey man, nice job. Love that. I think a lot of the language around stress is exactly stuff that we use in the office as well. So it's really just good to hear you reiterate that. I guess if we're gonna get maybe a little bit more specific around training, because I get this question quite a bit from clients that are starting out, and we get on the cardio topic, right?
Mhm.
Which one, in your opinion, And in the data, the most recent data, would you say is more zone two heavy or more, high intensity training for fat loss specifically?
If we're specifically trying to achieve fat loss, I like to utilize zone two. 2 or 3 times a week. You should be able to have a decent, like a decent paced conversation, just short of being completely out of breath. We're in that sort of 120, 140 beats per minute. 2 or 3 times a week, 15 to 20 minutes, right? Yeah, there's evidence of doing it fasted, but we do find that when doing things fasted, whilst we increase the metabolic effect in the moment, it sort of self-corrects and balances back out later. So for me,
Right.
easy one is like include it 2 or 3 times whenever you can get it done, right? Again, we're not looking for perfection. Don't overstress the complexities. Look at simplicity of execution. If you can do it first thing in the morning, great. If you have to do it after work, great. But yeah, a good option is the 15 to 20 minutes. Start with 3 times a week, and just you're not hammering that heart rate to the point of absolute exhaustion and you're ready to fall off the bike. You should be able to have a decent conversation and get the heart rate up enough. And just like an easy one I give athletes in prep is put your bike in front of the TV. If you
Right.
do your cardio at home, put your bike in front of the TV, or if you have a view, watch outside. It makes it easy and sort of like almost relaxing.
What about it? Let's say you're going to the gym for a more, hypertrophy based session, but I'm trying to kind of, have the most bang for my buck. Should I do that zone two pre-lift or post-lift?
Oh, that's a good question. I often debated this one. Again, it comes down to like I find it comes down to the session that we're doing. So if I've got someone doing
Yeah.
legs, I don't mind them doing a little bit of zone two beforehand. Gets blood flow to the joints, gets the body moving. But again, it's like time consent, like time restraint. Like if I've had pre-workout food, I'm wanting that in the body. I want to use that fuel effectively for training. Training is the adaptation we're
Right.
trying to achieve, right? We're trying to create hypertrophy, stimulate hypertrophy. We're trying to get after it and build muscle tissue. I want that fuel available for the training. So
Yeah.
as a sort of post-workout cool down, you're sort of catching your breath, you're getting the heart rate still up, but you're getting some cardio in. I like it that way, but I can
Yeah.
see the nuance of where you might add it pre-workout. But if I were to give an answer, I would say do it post-workout, use your day's fuel of eating and your available energy for the resources to do the thing that we want to do, which is train hard.
Love that answer so much, and definitely is one that I've echoed to some patients. So I'd love to hear that. Last one that I had, and it actually you kind of touched on it, just the research on the positive relationship between deeper sleep and fat loss.
Mm,
Talk to us about maybe some strategies outside
yes.
of trying to get that consistent circadian rhythm window. What are some
Yep.
strategies we can use to increase our sleep quality?
So I love this question because again, it goes to the variables outside our usual understanding of nutrition for fat loss, right? Like it's always just like eat less and move more. It's such a base level answer that I think undervalues the client's nuance, their lifestyle, and what matters. It is the factor, but that's why I love the sleep factor about weight loss and fat loss. So I just sort of touched on first thing that I want to do, right, is look at what time we're going to bed. So we want to try and base our sleep as close as possible to natural light and dark cycles, regulate or naturalize that circadian rhythm. So yes, going to bed when the sun starts to come down, or at least start to decrease stimulus of light. We're trying to get to that rest and relaxed state. Melatonin's rising, cortisol's coming down. In the morning, first thing you want to do to try and help regulate that sleep pattern is actually get up and get after it somewhere. Like get a morning walk in, get exposure to the sunlight, vitamin D absorption, sun exposure to our eyesight. All of that helps with regulating cortisol spiking, which then starts to correct and balance out our circadian rhythm. But some of the other things that I like to do is look at, we have a sleep quiz we do. It's quite detailed. We're actually looking at modifying it, but basically understanding the different domains of your sleep hygiene. So when was the last time you had a meal? Try to keep your hydration about 2 hours away from you when you go to bed. You don't want to have large boluses of water or fluids before sleeping because it actually forces you awake to go to the bathroom and clear the bowels. Having your largest meal before at least an hour to 90 minutes before sleeping. So whilst it's cool to go to bed in that sort of carb coma, you don't want to go to sleep so full and so bloated that the body is actually prioritizing blood flow to digestion. It actually decreases sleep quality. We want to go to bed full enough and replenish, but not so much that we're uncomfortable and the body's actually trying to prioritize digestion when you're trying to sleep. It tends to reduce the depth of sleep cycles and we get less effect from it. Other thing I like to do, as I talked about, is actually create structure before going to sleep. So the human body is actually quite good at habituation. We want to be doing stuff repetitiously that we know that we can enjoy and sort of condition ourselves to do. So I like to create what I call a sleep window or a sleep schedule or system. Basically, set the alarm on your phone of what time you should be going to bed, move it forward about half an hour. Now, why do we move it forward half an hour? Because you're going to use that time to get your clothes ready. You're going to get the meal prepared for the next day. Maybe your morning coffee's out and ready to go. Maybe your pre-workout's made up. You're going to get changed into your pajamas, your sleep environment. You're going to make sure the air conditioner is on, the fan's on, the white noise is on the bedroom. Brush your teeth, have the hot shower, everything you do to de-stress. That is going to eventually start to tell your brain, hey, when this alarm goes off, we're not getting up and going to work. We're starting to wind down. This alarm in particular is about us resting at night. And then eventually what will happen is you start to connect the idea of winding down with going to sleep. And the brain will help regulate, not directly produce, but help regulate your circadian rhythm. Melatonin starts to release with it. You're more hot. You're in a drowsier, sleepier state. You're going to wake up more energized, recharged, and recovered. Doing those things has been game changers for a lot of our clients in the sleep window, which is maximizing the depth and quality they're achieving. I'm a big believer in we're high performers in this room. We've talked about that. We're busy individuals. If you can't get 8 to 9 hours, you make the most of what you can get. So if you can get, 6 or 7 hours, you make it the best 6 or 7 you can get. Don't half-ass it just because it's not perfect. Go in with the intention to give 150%. Well, that starts with the decisions you make earlier in the day. And another real quick one just on that is look at your caffeine total. Caffeine has a metabolic half-life of 4 to 8 hours, depending on strain and consumption. I think it's 4 to 6 hours. So if you're taking 300 milligrams of caffeine at 4 p.m. in the afternoon, that's broken down your blood plasma levels, right? Your caffeine is stimulating adrenaline and it's stimulating the sympathetic nervous system. That is in your body at half that dose. So let's say 150 milligrams until at least 9 p.m. And then that cuts in half again. So you've still got basically the equivalent of a small espresso in your bloodstream until 2 a.m. So knowing what time to limit your intake of caffeine and stimulants will help you sleep at a deeper rate.
Love it, man. That was great. That was great. Amy, what do you got?
Yeah, Amy, hit me.
Oh yeah. Well, I just had a quick question just about like if there's I don't know if it's more individualized based on the person that you're working with. I mean, probably is, but as far as like the optimal ratio between like strength training, strength hypertrophy versus like cardio focus on fat loss, like I guess is there like an optimal ratio of that, or is it just kind of person to person how they respond to those stimuli?
Yeah, so we're looking at like what's the primary adaptation we're wanting to achieve, right? Like we shouldn't really be framing it in using exercise as the driver of the fat loss. The diet first and foremost will be the greater change of physiological adaptation or like the achievement, I guess, of the metabolic output. I find that training, like resistance training, we're trying to build or retain more tissue. Tissue is more metabolically demanding, or muscle tissue. So in a deficit phase, if we can keep training up and training performance in the gym up, that's why I put carbohydrates around the training window when someone is dieting. We're gonna retain more muscle tissue, which is going to retain more metabolic capacity because we need to eat more food to fuel that training. So the client can actually eat more food in the deficit while still burning body fat. Now, that's not a lot, but it's enough where the nuances I would focus more on resistance training and make the cardio work kind of like an addition to. So, when I start someone in a prep, usually it's a couple of sessions per week, and then we'll titrate that dose or that load as adaptation or adjustment starts to accommodate. And, the body starts to slow down. Okay, let's do another session or increase by 10 minutes. So it's more of a, like we're using the diet itself for change. The resistance training is to try and retain muscle tissue and remain metabolically effective and efficient. And cardio is kind of helping drive that deficit, but also improving beta oxidation. So it's less of an optimal ratio and more of the individual client, but looking at what adaptation we're trying to achieve and what the result is. Focus on the resistance training to maintain the tissue, build the mass, and actually, I guess, maximize output of carbohydrates. And then the cardio is just helping create that deficit a little bit more and improve beta oxidation. Obviously, mitochondrial improvements, and we've got aerobic, anaerobic improvements as well. But generally, I would look at it more as focus resistance, add additional sessions of cardio, just as needed. But 2 sessions a week, I believe most people can benefit from doing a little extra cardio.
Yeah.
Does that answer
So
your question?
you guys were mentioning, yeah. You guys were mentioning zone 2 training, like 15-minute run outside or something. I feel like right now with the heat, it's like you can walk outside in the heat and you're already in zone 2.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, that's why the heart rate range is also a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
I don't mind. So when I was in prep, when I prep clients, I like to get a recumbent bike. So we bought one for the house just for our apartment to be on the
Mhm.
balcony. A recumbent bike's a great way to do it. It's comfortable enough where usually there's air conditioning in the gym, whatever it might be, or maybe you're
Yeah.
at home. But that's a great one to, again, like you said, I do like clients to get outside. But if it's that hot, we're like, just stick with the walk. That's probably safer. But the recumbent bike, the seated bike, or a rower it creates that resistance enough, or that stimulus enough to get the heart rate up without being, you're going to die from heat stroke outside.
Yeah.
Dom had a
Great.
great
Thank you.
point in here on intermittent fasting, which I want to touch on, which is, again, when we're looking at intermittent fasting, realistically, what are we doing? We're just restricting the windows and hours in which we consume calories. Now, the reason why that tends to work is, yes, there is the argument of cell improvement. We get like the improved cell turnover. There's improvements in oxidation because we're using fats because there's no fuel in the body. Acutely, yes, beneficial. However, in the long term, what we're looking at is that window of time is simply reducing how much food you can eat, because most people can't scoff, 4,000 or 5,000 calories in the space of 8 hours. But you'd be surprised at how dense foods are that people can actually do that. So intermittent fasting mostly works for people because it just restricts the window of consumption. I would look at it more as what is your total calorie intake, obviously, because if you're intermittent fasting and going to train, you are under fueling, under providing the resources and materials for that adaptation, for training performance, and for recovery. So yeah, intermittent fasting, it's simply a methodology in which we consume the calories, but still at the end of the day, it's going to matter how well you're fueling, how well you're supplying energy to the body, and then are you fueling for the sessions, the training, the recovery you're trying to achieve. So it's one of those things where it's got a cool title, an easy option, like I guess thought pattern that we got when in university was, if it has a cool title to the name, or it has a poppy title to the name, or it seems polarizing, chances are it's not worth doing. And that's just an easy way to kind of look at it as like it's not to demonize anyone or say anyone's wrong. It's just simply, if it's like the trend nutrition ends up being a restricted based model, and restricted based models, we want to control for calories in a deficit. We don't want to restrict food. We don't want to restrict eating around training. We don't want to restrict consumption of any particular macronutrient or nutrient profile. So that's where I'm like, if it has a title to it like that, chances are it's not worth doing.
Awesome. Yeah. And, I think even you obviously mentioned kind of these stressed out systems that if we're not prioritizing recovery, then we're just going to continue to dig ourselves a bigger hole. Do you find that, in those calorie restrictions or that intermittent fasting could kind of, push a distressed system even further?
Yeah, dude, you're 100% right. Like, one of the things that I have found, and it's not changed my belief on the model, but there is so much more complexity than calories in versus out now. Like, when you really dig into it, like, yes, it is the biochemistry of energy exchange for sure, but those variables, like you talked about, like intermittent fasting, absolute calorie restriction, under fueling to the point, like, let's say you're a 100 kilo man like me doing 1,200 calories, that is going to create issues with exacerbating the chronic state that you're in. And the more inflamed you get, the more stressed the body gets, the more physiologically aroused it becomes, the more wide it becomes, the less you sleep, the worse you feel, the poorer you recover, the less your mental capacity, the worse the decisions. One of the things that I teach is, when you're in a state of energy deficiency, or when you're in a low availability of food and resources, nutrients, the more you have to say no, the more likely you're going to be to say yes. So if you're in a state of, like, you're trying to diet, you're trying to do all these things, and the boys at work are offering you a beer, the family's going out for McDonald's or Papa John's, you want to get pizza, the more you have to say no because you're in that particularly stressed state and you've got so much going on, you feel chronically exhausted and you're under fueled and under recovered, the more likely it is that you're going to end up saying yes, and you make those poor nutritional choices. You make those poor exercise choices. It's easier to stay in bed. And then again, you're perpetuating the cycle, because now you've got to restrict because you ate shittier food. Now you've got to restrict because go harder in the gym because you missed a session. And it just perpetuates this negative spiral that feeds into itself and continues to exacerbate the situation. So absolutely agreed, when it comes to like under feeling like that, you are under providing the resources and materials required to adapt and handle the stress. And then you continue to perpetuate the problem, making it even worse. And you end up creating much more of a negative loop that is taking you away from the target. Even though you put in all the work, right? Like, none of this video is questioning anyone's work capacity or drive to do hard work, but the way I like to kind of phrase it is, if you're running a business and if people here, you're athletes, you're running businesses, if you are getting the negative result from an investment or from a product or a service you're making, the same way that you're getting the negative result from the dieting choice that you make, would you continue to make it? The answer would be no. So why are we not applying that same logic and principle to our nutrition and our health and stress management? Does that make sense?
Great response. Absolutely. And then last one, if Amy doesn't have anything else, so much of the talk was behind really psychology, like she said, right? And kind of like behavior modification. And I was listening to a podcast with Luca, can't know how to pronounce the name sometimes, with the H, Luca Hocevar, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, yeah. And they were just talking about that, honestly, the X's and the O's, the rep ranges, how much you're really doing, like some of that is nil compared to actually just changing the behavior of the human that then sets them up for success for the result that they're looking for, right? So,
Yep.
do you have something, obviously you gave us some takeaways and the nutrition side of things, but on the behavior modification
Mm-hmm.
side of things, and something that you did with me early on was, kind of had me fill out some forms on what some minimal standards, what are some things that are, values that you can stand
Mm-hmm.
on at all times. Is there anything that's kind of like a quick shot way that we can, hey, do maybe like a self audit of our own current behaviors and see
Mm-hmm.
if they align? Is there anything that you have or that you like to teach that could be a quick, hey, what's going on? What type of, mentality am I carrying into this situation?
Yeah,
And how can I,
100%.
how can I change that?
So one of the things that I teach, it's a really quick tool, right? First and foremost is you've got to have your priorities, principles, values, goals. So as you know, Dom, we filled that in and we sort of set that up. And it's important because it's an emotional anchor point. Like if I can't bring my behaviors and my choices back to my values, and I can't bring in what it means to me, then it's just simply it's an act. It's not something that's meaningful. It's not impactful. It doesn't drive me. And we know that we need to correlate or associate an emotional connection to the motivation, or sorry, to the action to drive motivation. So the more connected I am to the thing, the more I love it and believe in it, the more I'm likely to do that thing. So the more I can connect my decisions and choices to that, the better it's going to be. So we get our principles, our values, our goals in line, right? So what do I actually want to achieve? That's the biggest thing that people struggle with, is actually what they want to work towards. I just want to lose weight. Well, what for? What does that mean? What does weight loss mean to you? Why does it matter? What's the point of it? So getting clear on what you actually want to achieve is a great starting point. The reason why that matters is because once we have our goals and our values, we connect those two things together. The values align with our goals and our goals align with our values. So an easy example I like to use as an extreme. If I say that I'm an environmentalist and then I go and invest in an oil company, the likelihood that I'm going to want to work or build that oil company is pretty low, because those two things conflict. And at my core values and beliefs, the goal that I have to make money through oil is pretty low if I'm saying that I'm an environmentalist and value the earth, right? It's just an immediate confliction I like to give. It's easy. So getting clear on what we believe in, what our values are, and what we want to achieve aligns the directions that we take. And then with that comes what we call choice points. This is probably the most powerful in the moment. Like, we're going to do sit here and do a full half-hour audit or analysis of someone's life. That's a big conversation. An easy thing that we can do is what we call choice points. Now, at every moment of the day, the biggest mistake that I find people make is they exacerbate and over focus on the outcome of the month, week, or year, right? I've got to, this is what I've got to do this year. I've got to get these things done. And they put all this pressure on achieving X. Now, that's great. I'm a big believer in outcome focus, but it needs to be in conjunction with process and performance focus. So one of the things that I teach is, once you have that outcome goal, is bring ourselves back to reality, bring ourselves back to the day. Where are you? In each moment, there is what we call a choice point or a fork in the road. Now, picture it kind of like literally like a V. At the bottom of the V is your values, your goals, your principles, and priorities. Every single choice that you make, we have to look at and make one simple decision. Does the choice that I'm about to make take me towards the goals that I want, or away from the goals that I want, or away from the values that I live by, away from or towards the values that I live by? If you can answer that question, sorry, I got it wrong. The experience or situation that you're in is at the bottom of the fork, the bottom of the V. The goals and values is basically, is it towards or away from the decision I'm about to make? The idea is that at the end of every day, can you say that you made more towards goals than towards choices than away choices? It's a tool that I use to teach in the moment decision making that removes emotionality, morality, justification. It's just simply is. Is this choice going to take me towards my goal or away from it, and my values and my beliefs? the idea is that I make more of those in the day. So that could be anything from I was going to sleep in, but I got up to train. I was going to stick to my diet, but the girls want to go out for a drink, but I chose to get a salad anyway. You know, I went to bed at 9 o'clock. I was going to go to bed after watching a movie, but I know I need to get my sleep. Friday night comes around. Had a great week. I want to go out with some friends. I'm still going to have, 2 or 3 drinks. That's away from my goal of fat loss. But in the net course of the week, I've made better choices across the week. That's okay. It's not the end of the world. So it's a tool that I use with everyone across CEOs, executives, athletes, bodybuilders, general lifestyle clients, mums and dads. It's not about making the perfect amount of decisions, also the perfect decision every single time. It's about removing morality from the situation and saying, is this just taking me towards my goals or away from them? And that just destigmatizes a lot of choices that we make. It gives you power back into decision making, and it's a real time option that you can use to kind of catch yourself in the moment from making a bad choice. I shouldn't say bad choice, an away choice. Does that make sense, Dom?
Great. Yes, absolutely, man. Absolutely. Very, very easy way and simplified way to kind of think that and kind of keep it in the ticker, every single day. So yeah,
If
that's
I want
great,
to
man.
like, yeah, I probably like, just because I like to ramble now, I've started. As I'm sure your check-ins, one of the things we need to understand, right, is we have this thing called the theory of planned intention, or planned behavior, and it is this idea that we have we have thought, we have intention, and we have behavior. Now, most people have this sort of autonomic, subconscious act process where we just don't even think about the thing, we just do it. It's where mindfulness is actually a useful tool. I think people overplay mindfulness in social media, but mindfulness is actually a very useful tool. But the idea is that in that gap, we have what is called the intention behavior gap. There's a gap in there where we can disrupt the intention before the action is achieved and pull ourselves back from making that decision if we don't want to make it. Right there is where we make that choice point. So we've got the intention, right? I'm sitting there thinking like, man, that cheesecake looks really good, but I've already had, pizza this week, or I've already had a donut this week, or like, I didn't really get my sessions in this week. Should I really get that slice of cheesecake? Well, the intention in your head is like, man, that looks really good. You should have it, devil on one shoulder, angel on the other. The gap there, if we can practice awareness and bring ourselves to reality and trying to catch ourselves, that is where we stop, grab ourselves and say, hey, is this taking me towards my goals or away from my goals? Well, if it's taking me away from my goals, what can I do instead that's just as fulfilling? Well, there's a great salad here. There's a great chicken here. These guys do an amazing chicken wrap. I'm really keen for a coffee. Maybe I just get a cappuccino instead of the 1,000-calorie cheesecake, and I might get a chicken wrap to go with it. Now I've only had 400 calories and I'm enjoying a sweet coffee, but I'm not having the extra 600 calories from cheesecake that provides no protein. So no decision itself is good or bad per se, but we're catching that intention and breaking it down before we act on it and saying, is this the choice I want to make? And that's where I try to get a lot of people to practice that gap, because most people don't actually bring awareness to what they're doing. It just becomes autonomic, right? Like, how many people you hear the quote these days of NPC, non-playable character, where they're just sort of coasting through life, just letting life make passive reactive decisions for them, as opposed to proactive intentional choices. And that's where I like to use the choice point to try and teach that intentional execution.
That's great, man. And I think, one thing you had mentioned too, that like if we do end up, even going against our values and our goals and making that decision that takes us further away, like just being okay with that sacrifice,
Yep.
right? Understanding that you're kicking that further down the road, and
Yep.
that's fine. You can do that for as long as you want, but just understand obviously there's consequences to making
Yes.
multiple of those decisions. So
And just to touch on that, because I don't want to keep everyone for too long.
yeah.
Understand that goals, values, right? That can mean many things. Don, with our goal setting, we have clients set values and goals in multiple domains of their life for that exact reason. Maybe this weekend, for example, for you guys, is about being a family. Maybe you're going to go have an ice cream cone. Maybe you're going to go have, Chipotle. Maybe you're going to go have something that isn't quite on the plan as usual. Now, that's still towards a goal or value, which is family for you. But it's like, how do we control it and make the best choice, versus like, I'm not going to make any choices towards spending time with the family this weekend, right? So it's not just about your fitness goal. It's not just about your health goal. It's about your total goals made up and which one am I justifying? So like, I'm happy to make that trade-off of nutrition this weekend, because I'm going to spend time with family. So I'm going to be okay about it. But I have to understand, like you said, that I'm just kicking that diet down the road a little bit. But if I'm okay with that, it's not the end of the world. You're not stepping on a bodybuilding stage in 10 weeks time where every ounce of calorie matters. So that's where I just want to emphasize that is like, it's not just about nutrition and training goals. It's also like, hey, for you, family's a big aspect of life. And as a coach, it's my job to respect that and say, how do we consider that? Well, maybe this weekend you're making that decision. It's about the family, not just about your six pack. Cool. That's okay. It just as long as we accept that and understand that trade-off, that's still a value-oriented goal, a choice, right?
Love it, man. Well, Ben, I really appreciate your time. I know that I might have to grab, my stuff was cutting in and out, so I don't know how clean my recording is. So
I
but
record the
I
whole
can,
thing, dude. I'll Dropbox it to you.
yeah,
Or
beautiful. Okay, so I can grab that too, because I know that we had a couple of people email us back this morning and say, they're looking for the recording, so we'll make sure we get that to them too, man.
absolutely.
So,
Thank you for having me, dude. I appreciate it. Appreciate the chance to talk to you guys and drop
Thank you
some
so much,
knowledge.
Ben.
Of
Appreciate both of
course.
you guys.
absolutely.
You
Have a
guys
good
enjoy
weekend,
Friday
everybody.
afternoon.
You
For
too.
sure, for
Bye.
sure.
Take care, Dom. Have fun with the family.
Yeah, absolutely, man. You crushed it. Absolutely. I mean, you made a pretty, definitely a complex situation. Very simple, very, very digestible for folks. So that's how you know your shit, man. You can make it simple, right? So that's
That's also
awesome.
I was hoping it was in line. I know we spoke about not just making about a typical nutrition seminar,
Right.
stress, pressure, high performers. So I want to make sure I cover those boxes for you.
Yeah, for sure. And you definitely did. And like I said, yeah, if you can get me that, because I'll probably chop up a couple clips and,
Yep,
try to incorporate them, even into my own, like we had talked about doing like just how easy it is to do the lessons within Coach Catalyst, right?
yep,
It'd be so easy to kind of grab a couple snippets and, say, hey, this is what Ben said, and then build off of that. So that'll be really, really valuable. So,
absolutely. I'll get that sent across to you this afternoon, dude.
my man. All right, brother. Have a great
Enjoy your
day.
weekend. Take care.
Yes, sir. We'll talk soon.